Welcome to Intuition Unleashed, a revolution in personal liberation. The go-to podcast that helps you access intuitive guidance combined with mental health and spirituality. Let your intuition guide you and unlock a life of true liberation. And now your host, Becc Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Intuition Unleashed, a revolution in personal liberation. Today, the title is Let It Be Enough, Healing Unworthiness and Coming Home to Yourself with Lindsay Morlock. And my guest, without further ado, is Lindsay Morlock. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited about this because when I have people on my show, it's usually because I've had a personal experience where I've received services or received guidance from you. And I want to share a little bit about that because just what you talk about today with your work is exactly what I received and experienced. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because I want other people to be able to experience the magic of your work. And let me kind of share a little bit about how it guided my work personally as a healer. So first of all, Lindsay calls herself a spiritual mentor, intuitive guide. She's also a breathwork healer. And she says she stops women from overgiving, ditching the people pleasing, and then finally feeling worthy just as they are. Lindsay was a former COO who walked away from the corporate world to follow her soul, and now she's about helping other women to do the same. She considers her work to feel like a warm hug and a wake-up roll call all into one. And Lindsay also has her own podcast that she calls Guided with Lindsay Morlock, and which is a worthiness activator. And she has grounded, compassionate way of helping you come back to yourself. And I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that. I was also very excited to be a guest on and I'm going to share that too when I put up the show notes, because we talked about self-sabotage. Yeah. So let me talk about the healing that I received from you and how I really want to talk about this worthiness piece. I can so relate to that. I'm going to actually bring up something that you sent me as part of, or something that we talked about as part of my hand analysis. And when I say hand analysis, right, we think about, or at least I think about what I think I had called it a palm reading. And you were like, no, hand analysis, right? Like it's so much not like what you're at a carnival and you get your, I see that you've had 3 marriages. Oh, that's part of it. I don't know why I did an accent, but but it's so much more than that. This is an in-depth piece, but I want to share something that you said in my reading that really I still talk about today. And I'm going to actually read this. So you said that I had an additional marking called the Guide for Lost Souls. You said you have a headline that's known as a Persephone headline on one of your palms. They said it says this marking is a gift marking, and we see these markings in only a small % of the population. So first of all, worthiness, right? I'm like,
I'm special. Yeah.
Because everybody spends your whole life saying, don't go thinking you're too special. So let's start there. And anytime there's a gift marking in the hand, it comes with a particular challenge or obstacle that ultimately helps to develop that gift. In the case of this marking, the challenge is that you'll have periods in your life where you feel trapped by your circumstances, where you may have had a hard time or seeing through to the other side, and that may have made you feel depressed or hopeless or powerless. Boing. As you work to find your way to the other side, you become a guide for lost souls, and this marking helps you to support others who feel trapped by their own circumstances. Wow. I'm going to tell you, that hit me because, yes, it did make me feel like the circumstances that we go through in our life, I was able to, at that point, reframe it. It's not something that has happened to you. You're not a victim. It's something that is provided to you as an opportunity, and also is a way for you to be able to show others this is doable. So wow, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. Because so when you say you make people feel worthy, that is all about what my Beccology program is about. And so I want other people to be able to experience this as well. So now I will stop talking because there is so much for us to go over. So welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Thank you.
I want to talk all about, I have to talk about this worthiness piece, what people can learn from their hand analysis. And you use this phrase, coming home to yourself. So we have a lot to go into. And I really also like people to have some takeaways, some things that they can do today. And at the end, we have a coupon, which has my name in it. And like that right there, my name in the coupon. Yay, we get to shop.
Yeah.
So you were a COO. Now, this is like, I'm going to assume you're giving up 7-figure income plus you're very,
No, no. Not
oh,
that high, but
okay.
it was a small company, but I was the COO, but a small
Still,
company.
still, but
Yeah.
you're very much in your head and intuition, woo woo, not a part
Yeah.
of your every day. Okay. So kind of tell us that story. Go back to the beginning. What's that
Sure.
moment, that enough moment?
It's interesting because my career trajectory has been, like that book calls it lean in. It's my career has been more of a jungle gym than a ladder in the sense that I've reinvented myself several times. And so I actually went right from undergrad to graduate school where I got a master's degree so that I could work in higher education. I was on the student services side of the house working in student affairs. And so I spent about 10 years in student affairs and I worked my way up the ladder very quickly there. And so eventually I got to a point in higher education where I had a decision to make. I either needed to go get my PhD so I could essentially become a dean of students, or I needed to jump ship completely and change careers because I was stuck. And one of the things that really bothered me about higher education is that many people had to get a PhD simply as a union stamp. So understand on the academic side of the house, they absolutely need these terminal degrees in their field. But I didn't always see that to be the case on the student services side of the field. And one day, someone who I was speaking to who got their PhD told me he paid someone to write his dissertation. And that was sort of this moment of truth for me that I was like, why am I going to go prove that I'm worthy of a position when other people are paying people off? Now, I'm not saying that's the commonality, but I felt like it was a divine moment for me because it was that moment of clarity for me to say, you know what? I don't need a piece of paper to prove that I can do this job. Do I really want this job? And given the political landscape of higher education, I was thinking, you know what? I don't think this is for me anymore. I loved the students, but I didn't love the politics of higher education. So I thought, I'm going to try my hand at something else. Luckily, I was able to get my foot in the door at this small fundraising consulting firm. They saw my transferable skills. They were willing to take a chance on me, and I was incredibly grateful for that opportunity. And so I went from student affairs into a fundraising consultant position, and I was just met with such deep imposter syndrome. I felt unworthy. I had always been somebody who excelled in my career, no matter how many issues I had in my life, my career was always the place that I felt solid. And so to be met in this new role with such feelings of not enoughness and imposter syndrome, it really rocked my boat and forced me to confront what I wanted to do. And so luckily, the people at this company saw the skills I did have, and we pivoted me to a more internal role. And very quickly, working behind the scenes in more operational roles and capacities, that's how I rose up the ladder very quickly. And so my own worthiness issues have actually been a catalyst for my career because I built my career on being a yes person, on overgiving, on overworking, on overfunctioning, on, proving in many ways, usually at the expense of myself, that I was worthy enough of doing any job that I was given. And so throughout the course of my time at this company, they were very supportive of my gifts. My boss yet let me bring hand analysis into the workplace. We brought that into some of our interviews from time to time. She allowed me to work with people internally at our company in a more HR capacity, just for purposes of personal development for people who are interested. And so my gifts were really supported at this company and specifically by my boss at the time. So I was very grateful for that. And all the while, I had this dream within my heart for probably 10 years prior of just being a full-time hand analyst, being a full-time spiritual entrepreneur. But given that I was single, only my income to depend on, it just felt way too much of a pipe dream, way too uncertain, way too unsafe to just jump ship and pivot to this new career. And so I was doing all of this spiritual inner work on myself at the same time that I was working up to the COO role. And so I was only in the COO role a couple of years before I decided I was ready to make this leap. And because of all the inner work that I had done, the leap felt more like jumping off of a curb as opposed to jumping off of a cliff. But I was able to transition out slowly in a way that felt more safe and more secure. But just because we have the courage to take the leap doesn't mean that we're ready to receive the dream that we're following, right? And so once I actually made that leap, it was being confronted with all of my fears. And what I learned is I had attached my title, my salary, my value to other people, to my worth. And so once I was just left with me as an entrepreneur, I came face to face with all of my issues around self-worth. And that was the deepest journey, the deepest dive that I've taken since. So to go back to your question, it wasn't really one moment of enoughness. It was following these little breadcrumbs that demonstrated to me that I wasn't fulfilled. I was doing all the things. I was, meeting all of society's quote unquote measures of success and ticking all these boxes. And then by the time I finally got to the C-suite, I was like, is this it? Like, it wasn't bad, right? But it just wasn't as fulfilling as I wanted to feel, given the amount of time and effort that I spent doing what I did. And so it was a beautiful opportunity and experience to grow and to learn. I got tremendous skills working in that company. And it was one of those moments of like, I need to stop abandoning myself and what I really want to stay safe. And so I think that was the catalyst for not only leaving, but also the work that I now do, which is helping people to learn how to not abandon themselves for some vision of what society says we should be doing or how people say we should be living.
This show is all about paying attention to your intuition. And it sounds like this is another great example of you getting to that place where we're supposed to all want to get to. And then once you get there and you're like, it doesn't I don't feel like I should be feeling.
Yeah.
And there's that word, should.
The shoulding, right? The shoulds shut us down. And it robs us of living our most authentic lives. And so, one of the things that I think society teaches us to do is it teaches us to find our reflection in others. And as a function of that, it's a challenge because we look outside of ourselves for approval, for appreciation, for applause, for certainty that we're on the right path, that we are doing what we need to be doing in order to live a life that looks good. And what I've had to learn is my life, when I feel best, is not at all what looks good on the outside to other people. It's what feels good to me. And what feels good to me is not going to feel good to other people. So that's not to say that the corporate path is wrong for people, because it's right for a lot of people. It just wasn't right for me. And so now I'm in a role where I get to wake up every day. I went to bed last night, and as I was falling asleep, I was so excited to be able to get up this morning because I was excited to talk to you. I was excited to write my book. I was excited to meet with my client. And I'm like, wow, how many people actually feel excited to get out of bed in the morning to get started with their day? That is not how I felt when I was living my former life, but that's how I felt now. And that's how I feel now. I'm just excited to get out of bed. And for so long, I felt so disconnected from myself, so detached from what I even wanted, what I even needed. And that's where hand analysis was such a catalyst for me for claiming what I'm here to learn in this lifetime and what this path is all about, because my hands have really offered this roadmap for how to live my most fulfilling life for me.
I love a bunch of things that you said, but yes, I do want to get specifically into the hand analysis too, so that people can understand what they can get from that and what advice it can give you or can it show you, reveal. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about that intuition piece, because I think that what you're sharing, this is a good point for everybody else, is because people will say, how do I know when I'm not in the right place. And you just described it. When you get out of bed and you're like, ugh. And like right now, I'm working with a client who his wife is telling me like he is miserable. He doesn't want to go to work. I think he just got a new boss or something. He doesn't want to go to work every day. He's miserable. And the worst day is Sunday night. And as we're talking about it, is because he's thinking about tomorrow I have to go to work. And I just don't like that face I just made,
Totally. And that's it for hand analysis. That's actually how I started to learn what it meant to be on purpose. So when we're living our actual purpose, you're putting forth effort into the things you're doing, but it feels effortless. Like you're energized, you're fueled by the things that you're doing. When we're out of alignment with our true purpose, we're putting forth effort into the things that we're doing, but they exhaust us, they drain us, they feel fatiguing and tiring. And so if we pay attention to how things make us feel, it actually becomes the compass for how to live our most right life. I know for so long when I was in higher education and then the corporate world, hand analysis was actually the only anchor I had of that feeling. I didn't feel fulfilled getting up and going to work every day. And hand analysis, though, was the thing that I would spend effort learning and talking to people and putting forth effort into it. And when I got done with my client calls, I was bouncing off the walls because I had so much energy. And that's how I knew, oh, life can actually feel like that all day, not just when you're doing this one thing. So how do I get more of that?
Mm-hmm. I love that you had the ability to have that as a contrast so that you could really see what it should feel like all the time.
Yeah.
Because people feel like, I think that it's work. That's why they call it work. You shouldn't feel like that. Well, it's possible. And you're a living proof of that.
Yeah, we rationalize, right? We tell ourselves rational lies. And yeah, it makes sense. But the truth is that it takes courage, right? To do something different. It takes courage to be able to think outside the box. And we're not taught that it's acceptable to go follow our path, right? We're taught, well, it's work. That's why they don't call it play. Well, my work feels like play all day long. My work feels like a devotion. It doesn't feel like work. Someone said to me recently, like, oh, you're always working. And I'm like, but it's not to me because I actually really like what I'm doing. It's fun for me to create what I'm creating. So it actually is something that now brings me joy, where I would have felt like, before, right?
You know what I love about your story too, is that there's this theme of you've always been in service on some level. So it's just a part of who you are.
It's in my hands. I'm in the school of service. There's 4 different life schools. And so service is my essence. So I'm always going to be, go for it.
Let's go there next, because you are saying all the good stuff now, right? So hand analysis, how does it work? What does it reveal about us?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So hand analysis essentially offers a blueprint of your soul's map for this lifetime. So think of it this way. Your fingerprints are formed 5 months prior to birth, and they never change throughout the course of your lifetime. And so the fingerprints can be decoded to offer us 3 key pieces of information. The information comes in the form of what we call the life school or the life path, which is essentially like the app running in the background of your life. It's the filter through which all of your life experiences are going to be run through. So just think of the life school. It's like, for me, I'm in the school of service. So to your point, it's my essence. That's the app running in the background of my life. I am here to serve. Now, then we get into the fingerprint decoding. 2 other key pieces of information: your life purpose, which is the gifts you're here to share with the world, and your life lessons. Now, the way I like to think about the life lessons are the thing that you're here to spend your entire lifetime majoring in. So we're never done with these lessons, but our lifetime is about the spiral of healing and peeling back every level and layer of these different lessons. And there is a point at which we exalt these lessons into a greater purpose. So let me give you an example of one of the life purposes. So my life purpose is about creative success. And so for me, my life purpose is all about defining what success looks like on my terms, not the way society defines success. And the way I'm going to be most successful is by being my most unique, authentic, individualistic self. So it's not surprising, given that this is my purpose, that what feels most aligning to me is to create this very unique path based on what feels good to me. Now, the challenge is because there's nothing inherently good or bad in the hands there, but there is like good hair day version, bad hair day version. There's an upside, there's a downside, right? And so that's the greatest expression of the purpose, feeling successful, living my most unique, authentic, individualistic life. Now, that is juxtaposed with when I am out of alignment, where I'm going to feel unfulfilled, when I get off path or I'm off path with my purpose. It looks like paralyzing fear of rejection. It looks like a deep desire to belong, but feeling like that fish out of water. It looks like following society's definition of success as opposed to creating my own definition of success. So I can review my path up to this point and see where my, inverse of the purpose really was the lesson that fueled getting me to this point now where I'm living my life in that creative success. Now, my life lesson is a combo platter of two particular lessons. So I have one life lesson known as guilt and self-worth issues. And I have another life lesson that's all about trust, intimacy, and surrender. So trusting too much too soon, not trusting enough, not trusting myself, not trusting the universe, being really intimate with others, but not having that same intimacy with myself. There's all sorts of ways that plays out. When we combine these two lessons into an archetype, it's all about the lesson of finding worthiness in relationships. And it's amazing because when we exalt this lesson into a purpose, you become a teacher, a mentor, or guide for worthiness, which is literally what I just stepped into about 2 months ago. And so my life has been this playground of learning around self-worth that has led me to this point where now that I've reclaimed my own worth, and by the way, that's never done. That's going to be my life's work. But what my learning has taught me up to date based on the hands is now I get to help other people who I'm just that much further ahead on my journey, but I understand intimately the path that they're facing and why it's so hard to transmute some of these worthiness issues. So it's crazy because I had the awareness 15 years ago of the lesson in my hand. And I feel like just in the last 3 years, am I stepping into the fuller expression of my purpose.
Was there something that came up that kind of let you see that juxtaposition that you just talked about?
Yeah, I've had a number of teachers over the years where I've been slowly learning how to reconnect with myself, learning how to process my emotions, understanding how my emotions actually are serving me and pointing me in the right direction. I learned more intimately, how do I connect with spirit? How do I get specific information from spirit about me and my path? I've used the wisdom from my hands. And then most recently, right, I've learned a lot about my codependent tendencies and my codependent ways and how I often would be giving and over functioning and proving my worth to people in order to get love. And I had some really trying experiences. I think honestly, since high school, I've had very trying experiences in relationships where I always felt like I was overgiving, but only to feel like I was questioning how much people were really willing to reciprocate and return, right? And so all of these different things led me to the awareness of I'm overgiving because I'm trying to get people to love me. And I'm only feeling like I'm valuable or I'm worthy if I'm somehow proving that or somehow earning it from other people. I was measuring, right, my worth based on how much usefulness or helpfulness or value I could offer others. And I had to really come into acceptance and take responsibility for how I was showing up and create boundaries much, and it's uncomfortable to shift our patterns, right? Because it's vulnerable to risk what happens as a result of stepping into the worth. But once I started to take responsibility for, hey, if I want my life to look different, I need to take responsibility here. And once I started taking those steps, and it looked like these micro decisions every single day to not abandon myself, meaning don't say yes when you really want to say no to someone, right? Like it was that simple where I would be like, yeah, I'll do that with you, even though I'm exhausted and I have nothing left to give. It's like, no, the answer is no, because I'm abandoning myself by saying yes when I really mean no, right? So it was really seeing my patterns and being able to change those in real time in service of loving myself more.
If you're talking about some scary words, responsibility, and you're talking about the definition truly of codependency, because people are like, I'm not codependent. But if you're looking towards other people to validate who you are and you need that,
yeah,
what I usually say is needing to be needed.
100%. And that was my moment of truth. I was all of a sudden one day, I remember the day that I was like, I don't need to be needed anymore. I needed to be needed everywhere. I wanted to be needed in friendships. I needed to be needed at work. But, like all areas of my life, I can point to where I needed to be needed. And I was so deeply looking for that external validation. And that's what taught me it's an inside job. It's got to come from within.
Those are some scary words because you're thinking, I'm doing everything right. Like I'm a good person. I do all these things for everybody else. And again, that's how we're measuring if we're a good person. If we're saying yes, even if we want to say no, we say yes anyway. And that's a measure of if we're a good person or not.
Well, and it sets up such a challenging dynamic with people in your life, right? Because you end up overgiving. Oftentimes you end up feeling like people don't give you what you give them, but it's impossible. It's impossible for people to outgive an overgiver. Like it's just it's not even they're not even set up for success.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. Because you're never going to reach that. And then so you're always set up, self-sabotage, just what we talked about in our episode.
100%. Self-sabotage, 100%. So we have to take responsibility for how we're showing up. And the thing I want to say is what I've learned is like, I am a giver. So that is an easy quality for me. That's just something that is my essence. It's natural for me to do. So I do have to bring more conscious awareness to where I need to pull back, not because I want to withhold giving from other people, but just because I have to pay attention to how easy it is for me to just say yes to people. And I have to just check in with myself first, because as I balance giving to myself, I have more to give others. But what I've learned about overgiving is I want to be giving to people from a place of feeling joy and excitement and just genuine love and support. And when we're not giving from that place, or we have some sort of outcome attached to why we're giving, we feel resentful.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Believe it or not, we're ready to take a break. We're going to take a short 2-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about worthiness and identity. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Intuition Unleashed. I'm Becc Nelson, and we are talking to Lindsay Morlock about hand analysis, worthiness, and we're going to come back on that point. We're talking about worthiness and your identity. So, Lindsay, why is it so hard for people to feel worthy without performing?
I think oftentimes, and like I said earlier, we're taught to find our reflection in other people. And with women in particular, we're often taught and socialized that our value lies in what we do for others, not in who we are, right? So we've inherited this lineage of self-sacrifice and emotional labor and invisibility. And And worthiness really isn't about confidence. It's about remembering that you're enough without having to prove or please or perform. And, performing is very external, right? It's about being good enough. It's about being impressive enough. It's about being helpful enough or useful enough. And embodying our worth is an internal process. It's this quiet knowing that you're whole even in your mess, right? Like our messiness doesn't make us any less perfect or any less impressive. And so when we stop striving to be the perfect helper, the perfect daughter, the perfect, whatever, and just start honoring our needs, everything starts to change. For me, I really feel like our self-worth comes from being in such deep integrity with ourselves that's what makes us feel good enough. Like we're so aligned with our truth. We're aligned with what makes us feel good. We feel good about how we're showing up for ourselves and with others, right? And that's not about perfection, but it's about taking responsibility, even when we get it wrong, and learning and growing all the while. And so I think, that's for me, that's what worthiness is really all about. It's not becoming someone, it's not becoming your worth. It's a remembering, like a reunionizing with the truth of who you have always been. But we're taught to forget that.
Interestingly, this is a phrase that came up in our last episode last week too, remembering who we truly are. And that's referring to that we've had many lifetimes, and this comes up in each lifetime that we're in. So we have to remember those pieces. That's what you mean by remember.
Remember, yep, like bringing back together these pieces of ourselves. Because, when we're born, like if you think of these little innocent babies, right? Like they're these beautiful little beings that come out of the womb. Like they're not sitting there thinking about they're not enough of a baby. They're not crying enough. They're crying too much. Like they're not thinking about all this stuff, right? Yep. But as adults, our minds are going crazy, comparing ourselves to one another's, comparing our paths, our journeys, how much money we make, what our titles are. Fill in the blank with what we're comparing, right? People are comparing what they had for lunch on social media versus what I had for lunch on social media. The comparison culture is out of control, and it makes us feel either better than others or it makes us feel less than. Either way, it's two sides of the same coin, but we're looking for some source of validation to prove that we are enough the way we are. But there's really ultimately nothing to prove because we are just worthy. It is our birthright. This is how we're born. And we are just taught to forget it as our lives go on.
I love what you're saying about, you're right. Babies don't sit there and say, I'm crying too much. Am I being too much?
No,
because we do as we get older, because it's just something that we're taught.
Right.
Not something that's inherently in us.
Yeah, we're taught to forget our worth, and and we're taught to disconnect from ourselves. I always think of the example of, where do we learn to disconnect from our emotions? And Spirit always flashes me to playing on the playground as a kid, and you fall off the monkey bars and you skim your knee, and an adult runs over to you, and you're crying because you're bleeding, and the adult's going, "Oh, you're okay, you're okay." No, I'm not. I'm bleeding, right? And so in that moment, it's confusing for a child. Now, I'm not saying this to blame or shame any parents because we're trying to distract, right? We're trying to make the kids feel better. But what would our world be like if we ran over to that child and said, "Are you okay?" And they say no, and say, "It's okay not to be okay. Your knee hurts," right? And just validate the experience they're actually having. Because I think our disconnection comes from the invalidation that what we are feeling is not truth. Our feelings are always valid. They're not good, bad, right, or wrong. They're just intuitive messages from our soul. And so as we reconnect with ourselves, that's how we remember, right? We have to validate our own emotions and give ourselves permission to be who we are in the world.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't think of it like that, but right away, the message is, what you're feeling is not true. I'll tell you what you're really feeling.
Yeah. And we learn that authority figures know better about us than we know about us. And so over time, I feel like it's like these little fragments, these little pieces of ourselves that we start to give away to other people. And before you know it, we're outsourcing all of our power and looking to other people to prove that how I feel is how I should be feeling, right? I mean, I remember asking all of my friends their opinions about who I was dating or all their opinions about some topic in my mind before I ever got clear about what I was feeling on the topic, because I was so insecure about how I was in relationship with other people that I needed other people to tell me that what I was feeling or the red flags I was seeing were valid. But I gave my power away in that, right?
You're so right. Yeah. And I kind of like that. Next, I really want to talk about how do we bridge the gap between the spirituality and also applying it to everyday life. And I think that you just mentioned one of them. As parents, you can start off by just saying, if someone hurt that, yeah, that must have hurt. I can see your knees all, but just to start there. But how do you help clients to begin to apply the spiritual insight into their daily lives?
Well, the first thing I think is always helping people develop some sort of mindfulness practice, or rather a presence practice. And so our minds are overly busy as humans. We are overly busy, and that is what ultimately disconnects us from our bodies. And so I think one of the easiest things people can do is literally put a reminder in their phone and just do like a body check, like do a body scan, meaning just take a minute, get still, maybe place your hand over your heart and just take a deep breath and just scan your body from crown to toes and just notice, is my head feeling, spinny or tight? Is my throat tight? Is my chest heavy? Our bodies store emotions. Our bodies are keeping the score all the time. And our bodies are wanting us to witness whatever is happening inside them. And our bodies are holding those emotions. And so when we pay attention to our emotions and give ourselves some space to breathe into them, we allow ourselves to move through our day in a much more centered way. But I think oftentimes, the busyness of life, the busyness of our minds and thinking, we need to like slow everything down and dial everything back and be able to have a little space to just connect with ourselves. And I think the easiest connection that we can make is just with the breath. Slow down, take a deep breath, quiet the mind, check in with your body.
Is that connected to the breath work that you do too when you're saying?
So as a breathwork practitioner, I practice a different form of breathwork. I mean, that is just a presence practice. And, some people have a meditation practice. Some people do walking meditation. I am a big advocate of anything that brings us back to just focusing on the present moment. That said, as a breathwork facilitator, I practice something called pranayama breathwork. It's a breathwork that is specifically designed for emotional release. So we're not breathing to relax. We're actually breathing to release. And so our issues get stored in the tissues of our body. And most people are thinking their feelings. They're not actually feeling them. Meaning, if you're thinking about all the reasons you're sad, if you're thinking about all the reasons you're angry, you're not feeling your anger, you're thinking your anger. And so that anger is actually getting stored in the cells of your body if you do not release it. And so what this type of breath work is designed to do is literally pull up and purge out these emotions that get stuck in the physical body using the breath. And so this type of breath work, you're breathing actively for about 30 to 40 minutes. And so it can have some psychedelic effects as well, but completely drug free. But you're using the breath to essentially purge the physical body, release stored emotions, but reconnect you with your higher self and greater consciousness so that you can really feel that self-love, really connect with deeper parts of yourself. Sometimes people are bringing in messages and things from their guides, getting visions for their life. Everybody has a different experience with it. But I think in its basic form, I tell people it's emotional roto-rooter.
And you offer that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two different types of breath work. We're talking, well, not breath work. We're talking about just breathing to be sort of present and in your body, which is what you were talking about before. Yep. And then how just noticing how that things might be impacting your body. Where am I feeling things and what am I feeling?
Right. And I think that's how we need to feel emotions anyway, is just connecting with ourselves. Yesterday, I'll give you an example. I was in the car and I was feeling a little bit off. I just kind of felt this like rock/sourness in my stomach. And so I was bringing attention to that. I was perfectly happy. I didn't really feel like anything was wrong, but I'm very tuned now to the sensations that are happening in my body. And so as soon as I got home, I just got quiet and started to breathe and asked myself the question, like, what is this sensation trying to tell me? And in the stillness, I got the answer, right? It was pointing me to a feeling of sadness that I didn't know was there, that needed to be witnessed, that needed to be released. And the minute that I saw it and just brought my breath and my attention to that place, to that sensation in my stomach, it released. That was it, right? So now I've released that emotion. Now my body is clear again. And as someone who is intuitive, it's important for me to keep my body clear because I'm doing readings for people all day long. And if I am not clear myself, it's going to interfere with the information that I'm getting for other people. But ultimately, for any person, when we don't take the time to process our emotions, they clog up in the body. So you can almost think of it as like every time you've got every time you've got an emotion clogged in your body, think of it as like someone slinging mud at you. And now you've got mud here, you've got mud there, you've got mud there. And so when we breathe and bring attention to these sensations and release them, it's like someone taking the Windex and just clearing off all of that mud so that you're clear again. Because think about it, when we're walking around wounded, angry, sad, we project that into the collective. But when we keep our own energy feel clear, we're sharing love, we're sharing happiness, we're sharing joy, and that becomes the ripple effect. So taking responsibility for our emotions, for how we feel, has such a great impact on every facet, not just of our lives, but of those we share our lives with too.
You're bringing up a good point, right? Because I'm thinking about how many times with my own clients, I hear things like, oh, my kids don't know what's going on, or my kids never hear me and my husband fight. Right. And they okay, that might be true, but they're also seeing the aftermath because you're wearing it.
Yeah.
And
they feel it.
Mm-hmm.
People feel it, especially sensitive people, right? And I think this is where too, as kids, sometimes, kids who are highly sensitive and attuned to their parents, if you see parents who are completely emotionally withdrawn, but you feel a different experience, it's confusing because you're like, what am I feeling and what am I tuned into? Because it's not congruent with what I'm seeing. And that becomes a whole sort of, mind game with yourself. And as we get older, we stop trusting what we're feeling because we haven't had the external evidence to validate that our experience internally is true.
And you're also told.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's not true. And so that's why I think it's so important to learn how to reconnect with your own body, your own intuition, your sensations, your knowing, because that's how we end up understanding like what's ours and what someone else's.
So one way that people can work with that, they do this body scan, they figure out where it might feel a little off or a little heavy, and then ask it, what do you have to tell me? What's going on here?
What's the message? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because I think once we get the message from the emotion, it releases. When we get the message, it actually releases. And, the thing I'm being flashed to talk about is it's so uncomfortable for us to be still sometimes. I mean, here I am very practiced at leaning into my emotions. And yesterday, this feeling that I was with was so uncomfortable that I kept wanting to check my phone in between. I kept looking at the clock. Can I get up now? Do I have to keep sitting? And I had to keep making myself sit there. Now, I was maybe only sitting there for 5 minutes total, but we're so uncomfortable, like leaning into our emotions and being present present with the emotion that we often have to coax ourselves into just sitting still long enough. Because as much as we are uncomfortable leaning into our emotions, it's actually far worse for us to resist feeling our feelings. And that's what most people are doing. I mean, a lot of us are walking around for days, weeks, months, resisting feelings. Whereas if we just sat down for 5 minutes, we would feel and witness the feeling and release it, and we can go about our day and be happy again.
And I love it. Right. I've heard emotions are energy in motion. They are meant to move through you, not to sit in your body.
Yeah. And most emotions only actually last about 90 seconds. And so if we're really able to be present with the sensation of emotion, so what I mean by that, right? I talked about the sourness of my stomach. And so I think one of the easiest ways that people can be with their emotions is personify it. So right? When I'm having trouble being present with an emotion, I will feel into, say, like, let's say my chest is feeling kind of heavy. I might, give it a color. I might feel like, is this a liquid? Is it a solid? Is it a gas? What does it look like? What does it, it felt like a wet blanket laying over my chest. I felt a heaviness. So allow yourself to describe the sensations, allow yourself to personify it, to give it a color, because as you're witnessing what you're feeling, it's helping to release it and clear while tricking your mind into having a productive job so that it's not like, let me look at my phone. Are we done processing this emotion yet? Right? Like we have to really stay present with what we're feeling, but it's very effective when we do.
Yes. To be able to illustrate it or put a code to it, a color to it.
Yeah.
Because then you can visualize it. So go back to the breath work, right? And you've been working on this worthiness piece. How does the breath work support that?
So what I think breathwork does is at its core is it allows us to release all of the lower level energies, the lower level thoughts, beliefs, limiting patterns. It allows us to release all of the emotions connected to those things, to clear the physical body. And it allows us to access higher wisdom around our worthiness. So by the time we're done with the breathwork session, someone might actually be connected to their worth in vibration, right? So again, not thinking about all the reasons that they're worthy, but just being at this vibration in their heart of, oh, this is what worth feels like, right? This is who I truly am. This is the truth of who I am. And so what breathwork does is it clears all the barriers to who we really are. And as we move through different things, like, so say people are going through some sort of relationship breakup, right? And they have a lot of different emotions, right? Maybe there's grief, maybe there's anger, maybe there's betrayal, maybe there's, I don't know, confusion, maybe there's doubt. There's all sorts of things, right? I like relationship breakup as an example because it's like a can of worms, and people have a lot of emotions that they're working through on a daily basis with that. What breathwork does is it's like a massive purge of all of the emotions so they can arrive back at a place of personal integrity where it's easier to access the truth. So in relationship, if someone broke up with their partner, they might feel like, okay, just because they didn't choose me doesn't mean I'm not worthy. It just means we weren't meant to be. Right? So breath work and clearing those lower level emotions allows us to access the truth of who we are, which is usually a much higher perspective, a more integrous perspective than feeling like a victim of our circumstances.
So you're saying it's sort of, there's these two pieces. There's these validations like I am enough, and this, we just weren't right for each other. Right.
Yeah.
And to say those things that you may not actually be feeling. And you're like, you talked about, does the outside match the inside? And you're saying that the breath work sort of clears that fog so that you're able to actually believe that and embody it energetically.
Exactly. And, there's different experiences for different people. I was working with a client a couple of years ago who was working through some massive grief from a parent that had died. And they were able to not only use the session to just release the depths and layers of sadness, but in the end, their mother came through and gave them a message. So they were able to access this deeply peaceful message from their parent that was really healing for them. It was exactly what they needed to hear in the moment. I've had people use breath work when they're really angry, and that anger dissipates through the breath work so that they can come back to the truth that actually their anger is reflective of the fact that their boundary was violated. And how do they now learn how to protect their boundaries as a function of whatever happened? Maybe they violate their own boundary. Maybe other people are violating their boundaries, right? I have people who use breath work to process old trauma, old, sexual trauma or physical abuse. And sometimes breath work is helping people to learn how to reconnect with their physical body when it hasn't been safe for them to be in their bodies because of past experiences and trauma, right? So there's a lot of different functions for it, but ultimately, what not abandoning yourself looks like is creating this place of deep safety and security within ourselves. It's this place of self-belonging, this place where we're choosing ourselves. And in order to really belong to ourselves, we need to feel like who we are and being in our own skin is safe. And we can't feel safe if we're constantly beating ourselves to a pulp and letting our minds and our inner critic bully us. That doesn't create a feeling of inner safety, right? That creates a feeling of inner bully. So those types of things and breath work releases all of the noise and all of the mind chatter. And this breath work in particular actually helps to quiet the mind so that we can access those higher channels and those higher portals.
So when you go back to that term self-belonging, can you just kind of, what does that mean to you? Just go back to that piece for a second.
Yeah. So self-belonging is all about learning how to be so comfortable in your own skin that you don't shrink, you don't contort, you don't conform to fit in with other people, that you just show up fully as yourself, you shine your bright light without fear of potential reaction or rejection from other people. And when we are talking about worthiness issues, right, that's all we're doing is we're shrinking to be loved. We're conforming, we're contorting, right? Like we're changing who we are to try to be good enough, or we're not sharing all of our beliefs because we're afraid we're not going to be loved fully or seen fully. So when we belong to ourselves, it's knowing that we've created a place of safety within ourselves so that we feel free and safe to be who we are. And that is not to diminish. I mean, there are people who are marginalized in this country who truly have reason to not feel safe, right? Because they might actually be persecuted. So I want to be really, sensitive to that. But when we create this place of safety within ourselves, we know what the real danger is of where we can, truly show up our full, most authentic selves. But our intuition will also lead us away from that danger when we've created that safety within ourselves. Does that make sense?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I think if we all just think about when we hear that, where is that in our bodies, right? Because that's very telling right there. Wow. A very helpful episode, very enlightening episode. Here's where my name is a coupon comes in, which I just love. It's very validating externally. So if you
I love that
code, it's Becc25, correct? If they go onto your website, which is Lindsay Morlock.com. There's another Lindsay Moreno that
she's great too. Yeah.
And then you apply for your own hand analysis session. You use the code Becc25. You'll get $25 off. Thank you so much for allowing our listeners to have that, because you need to experience your own hand analysis. It's fascinating. So I can't wait to have everybody share that and get some feedback from that. So we are out of time today. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing all your experiences with us. Lindsay, that hour went by in a New York second. In 2 weeks, I have Shaman Sarah coming in to talk about her journey with ayahuasca, which is a whole another piece of sort of reconnecting with ourselves. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today for another Intuition Unleashed episode. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Intuition Unleashed. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. But before you go, we have one little challenge for you. Most of us have sneaky little habits that hold us back and trip us up, so why not take this not at all uncomfortable quiz to find out what you do to derail yourself from achieving your goals and how you can call yourself out on your own BS. So get to know your self-sabotage specialty and take the first step towards getting out of the way of your own success. Just visit https://becknelson.com/quiz and take the quiz now. That's becknelson.com/quiz, and we can't wait to see your results. As always, we'll be back next week with more Intuition Unleashed. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening.